topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Hi there. Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program. Great to have you again. This is Elise Cortez joining you from Dallas, Texas, which is my home base. If you don't know me yet, I'm a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, organizational logotherapist, inspirational speaker, social scientist, and author. My team and I help companies discover and articulate their purpose to thread it through their culture and the operations. And we work with forward-thinking or forward-reaching organizations to develop inspirational leaders who create cultures where people actually want to come to work and do their best. And we provide programs that enable individual team members and leaders to discover and unleash their passion and purpose at work to catalyze fulfillment, engagement, and productivity. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at elisecortez.com. With us today is Matt Zinman. He is a difference maker devoted to personally enriching the happierness of at least 100 million people by 2030. He's the author of Z-isms, Insights to Live By, which shares his experiences as an entrepreneur, athlete, single parent, caregiver, and nonprofit founder. Matt is a speaker, educator, and the creator of the life improvement courses based on Z-isms called the Mindset Reset, the Life Upgrade, and the Well-Being Reset. He is also the host of Insights to Live By, a podcast that invites guests to share their own life lessons. We'll be talking about the importance of addressing well-being in the workplace today and Matt's perspective and approach to do so. He joins you today from Philadelphia. Matt, welcome to Working on Purpose.
Hey, Elise, thank you. Thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to our conversation here.
Oh my gosh, isn't it great to be on the other side of the mic for a change?
There are positives and negatives to both, but yeah, I love it either way. So for sure.
Awesome. Well, we have a lot to talk about, and I've been asking this same question to everyone I run into, so you can't get away from it either, Matt. I'm really interested in your perspective on how the workplace has been changing over the last couple of years. What's your perspective on the matter?
Well, for sure, I think we could do a whole show.
I do, just on this one question. Mm-hmm.
So just to keep a top line, there's a lot of greats that aren't so great, and you've got the Great Resignation, the Great Retention. We hear the Great Reshuffle, none of which are great trends, and they were all happening before the pandemic, and then since the pandemic, for sure, the entire world of work, I think, has shifted, as well as have people's values and what companies need to do in terms of their culture. And to the topic that we have today, certainly front and center for me, and I know for a lot of people, is well-being, and the fact that there is an underlying pandemic here that has not, as much as it's already been documented, I don't think we're even all the way there to realize how everything has affected everyone. And that is an underlying driver, especially for people now that they're home or hybrid, and really just recognizing the value of that work-life balance. And lastly, even more so, work-life integration, that we're no longer, this one person at work and another person at home. We bring our whole selves, which I think is a good thing.
I do too. Yeah, one of the things that I have been recently noticing in the literature is we've moved away from this notion where lives revolved around work to now let's make work revolve around life. And I think that's really, really a healthy change. And I certainly am very happy to steward that in organization. So your work is really important to be talking about and sharing with the audiences just for that reason. So Matt, you're a perfect contribution to the show. As you know, this is curated content, so it builds on everything we've covered before. So then based on what you've done research, you've got a book out, you've got your own programs out. what do you believe that people really want from work today?
Well, I think it's really picks up where we left off to the last question, which is I also think it's generational, at least. The millennials, Gen Z,
Hmm.
they all have already. It hasn't just been the pandemic. I mean, they've already had and come into the workforce with a known values shift. Life is not all about work, and I think the older generations, as it were, come from a little bit of a different experience with that. Um, but that's really what matters most. And I think that now that people are home, and I mean, I've worked as an entrepreneur for over 20 years now, so it's something I'm certainly familiar with. But I wouldn't trade that freedom for the world. And I think as people have gotten more and more of a taste of it, their values once again are right there with them in that priority.
Hmm. Great points. I think what your distinction about the generations is also really important. We certainly know that Gen Y, which is the millennial generation, and Gen Z, they really, really insist on meaning and purpose, and certainly working for an organization that aligns with their values and that is up to something in the world. So I think to your point, I think it's just maybe where we are today, where the pandemic came, it just further, I don't want to say exacerbated, but further highlighted that those sets of values. So I think that was a very, very astute observation. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, One thing I want also to mention on this point is the shift in the need for companies to recognize that they no longer are needing to offer jobs that people need. They have to be offering jobs that people want. And it used to be this social contract of, well, almost, uh, parental, I employ you and I, feed and clothe
Right.
you. That's not how it is anymore. And people, I think, that's what also started fueling the great resignation to begin with.
Hmm. Definitely. I'm writing my next book, and I'm also talking about this new uh, workplace that we find ourselves in, and of course, what we're seeing is this is the workplace of the employee today. And I know that's a hard transition for a lot of companies, which is why you and I, of course, are trying to help those companies out. And I was certainly really intrigued, Matt. I think it was last year when the Gallup organization came out with their new book on well-being, and I thought, wow, it's interesting. An organization that spent a lot of years caring about strengths and engagement has now suddenly shifted to well-being. I think there's something here. So I went out to their site before we came onto the show, and I picked up what they'd written recently. It says our latest findings show that employee engagement and well-being have stalled out, and that stress is at an all-time high. The result is high burnout and quit rates. Leaders need to focus on how their employees are feeling, both in their role and in their life, to begin to revitalize their workplaces. Amen.
Yeah, it's about time, right? I mean, it's a shame that the trends that have occurred in recent years have had to be the ones that contribute to the need for this shift. But that's where we are, and there's some good things and some silver linings here for us.
And I have another colleague that also worked in employee engagement for quite some years, and he's also focused now and riveted on well-being. And of course, you and I are riding a similar kind of wave. I'm not entirely in the well-being space, but I also address it. I think that's just really interesting to see that pivot. So interesting sort of pattern that I see there. So to that end, how did you become interested in well-being? Where did this come from for you?
Well, in a number of ways, it's a lifelong pursuit. And, thank you for the kind introduction. I was a semi-professional athlete. And so a lot of training, in and around ice hockey. I still play here in my mid 50s, which is it's nice to speak to. Um, but also as a result of the book, one of the things that I disclosed and have since been very outward about is the fact I've had to contend with depression since my mid early teens, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody. And really, everyone knows what depression feels like to a certain degree, but if you suffer from it, you just go a lot lower. And over the years, I've learned how to manage it even better, and stay healthy. And so that's certainly a motivator. If you have any idea how bad it feels, you never want to feel that way. So
Mhm.
certainly at the foundation of well-being, those two things combined.
Mhm. I really appreciate that. And then you can see behind me the red book. That's my Passionately Striving and Why anthology collection, and that's where I really went around the globe to find 25 women who are sharing their intimate stories of discovering their purpose, and then I categorize those stories by their path to purpose. One well-known path to purpose, Matt, you probably know, is what's ailed you in your life, and in the process of dealing with that, of wrestling with what's ailed you, what have you learned that you could teach other people? I'd say that's your path. It's also my path, by the way. Same path. Mine was more about wrestling and looking for meaning. So it's fascinating, when you've spent all this lifetime, as you say, addressing all of this, and so you've learned an awful lot about this notion of well-being. I'm interested then also to understand you have a very unique perspective, and you've done quite a bit of research, and I love your one sheet you put together. I don't know if that's something you can share with listeners, but I want to understand from your vantage point the business challenges that result from a lack of well-being in the workplace. I think for a lot of people, well-being sounds really squishy and soft.
Well, that's fair. And then, you go back to the companies and needing to change, are they just checking boxes? Or are they actually making a meaningful contribution with the kind of programming that people need? One thing I do want to clarify, not in any way to discredit, but I'm not a clinician, Elise, in
Yes,
terms of like
right.
going back to, I don't have the doctor in front of my name for, in one sense or another. I come at this from a lot of life experience. And I think in many ways that's a lot more relevant than someone, practicing from a clinical standpoint. And I can give a different perspective around it. To the point that you just made about the new research, that's all secondary research, nothing that I conducted
Hmm.
firsthand, but compiled it in a way that creates a business case. Certainly for any company, any one leading in chief human resource officers, chief people officers, people who are leading employee resource groups, anybody who has to convince the powers that be to invest in well-being. That's why we did it. That is not on the site yet, but it is available to download off of my LinkedIn if anybody wants quick access to it. And that's called The Current Impact of Workplace Unwellness.
Would you give us a few of those? There's some amazing zingers on that one sheet. Will you give us a few of them?
I think one of the major zingers, which is front and center, is a study that just came out this past month from Deloitte and Workplace Intelligence. Can you hear me okay?
Perfectly.
Was my mic here?
Yeah.
With executives. And that really is the point. Executives are human, and they're people too. And they're reporting their burnout, their well-being priorities, and that 70% is the stat that are seriously considering getting a better job for themselves that supports their own well-being. And 81% consider well-being more important to them than advancing at work.
Mm.
So when people go to make that case, which is, at least some positive here, they, can acknowledge that, you executive, you who are holding the purse strings, can certainly relate to why it is that this is important, because you're in the same boat.
So before you go on to another one, I want to chime in on that, Matt. So I had a guest on earlier, Donna Cutting. We were talking about how part of what's also helped cause really the sea change in how the workplace is architected and addressed, and how we're starting to see some changes, including allowing hybrid work or remote work, is just for that reason, that for the first time in the pandemic, what happened was there was kind of an equalizer. And that is that even the executives and the leaders were also sheltering at place, working at home. They were Zooming in. Their cats and dogs were walking across their desk as they were trying to have a meeting. Their kids were coming in the back asking, can they have some more Cheerios? And they were the same size box on the computer as everybody else. So what I'm also addressing this in my book too, is that it's part of what probably allowed us to be able to make these changes as quickly as we did, because the leaders and executives were also personally impacted. They felt the pain themselves. So maybe this opportunity, in that these managers are being impacted too, is our real opportunity to really shift the tide. What do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the managers is the right theme to pick up off of what you just said, because they really are that connective tissue in an organization, and they may not be fully prepared themselves in order to handle the adjustments of checking in with people and extending the corporate culture to everyone throughout the organization. And I do think that the managers are in great need of support in and around that kind of training, and to address a number of things that, come with well-being challenges to the question that you asked around productivity, absenteeism. But another one, at least a lot of people don't know about, is presenteeism, which has been well documented now. That's basically when you're clocked in, but you're checked out. and that the loss of productivity is a lot worse than even not calling out of work.
Wow, that's interesting that you bring that up. One of the other things that I think is really fascinating that I'm really interested in championing, I've had some guests on talking about, how to really continue to evolve the workplace and redesign it, if you will. Linda Grattan from the London School of Business talking about that, and then Catherine Matisky talking about how to really architect the virtual workplace, and with the idea being in part that we need to focus less on the presence, the physicality of a human being, and rather their productivity. And it's just so fascinating to me, Matt. I just so want to help steward this new world, and there's so much work to do.
It never ends. But interestingly, respectfully, I did have a recent guest on my show, and Matt Burns, who heads up, HR, and he's got some good research to point to that speak to the fact that people who are now, working at home, hybrid work, are more productive than being in the office, which I think, a lot of executives and business owners would think is counterintuitive from what they're used to. But the data is now there.
I'm glad to hear about that, data. That's great to hear. Let's grab our first break. It goes by so fast already. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with Matt Zinman, who is the author of Zisms, Insights to Live By. We've been talking a bit about what's going on in the world of work today. Why is well-being so important? After the break, we're going to get into his book, his programs, and what he's trying to address to help companies. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us, and welcome back to Working on Purpose. Before we get back into the program, I do want to invite you to check out my book, Purpose Ignited. I really wrote that book to awaken readers to their passion and purpose and start them down the path toward their inspirational leadership. And I use the content as the basis for my manager and leadership program, so I hope you'll check it out. With us today, if you're just joining us, is Matt Zinman. He's the author of Zisms, Insights to Live By, creator of various life improvement courses, and the host of Insights to Live By. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. So, speaking of books, this beautiful thing is yours. Look at this thing that you created. I love this. I never tire of having authors come on my show, by the way. So I really appreciate it when PR people come and find me, or when you and I connect organically like we did on LinkedIn. So where did the book come from for you, Matt? Why did you write it? It's not an easy thing to produce a book.
Well, that's a fair statement. The answer is really in part back to the just the life experience adding up. And I know everyone can speak to their own life experience. And yet, for me, some of the things I mentioned in terms of contending with depression, experience, being, in the athletic circuit. I also saw my mom through a very bad illness in my late 20s, being a single dad for a number of years, very happily remarried now, having been in a number of serious relationships over time, raising kids. An entrepreneur, founder of a nonprofit, it just adds up. And there are a number of things that I continue to experience that I found very helpful for my own life that I really haven't heard people speak to in quite the same way. And I felt like I had a message and content that I wanted to put into book form to start and help people. And that's why I know a lot of people write books, and I'm so glad I did. So here we are as a result.
It's awesome. It's absolutely awesome. And I also appreciate too, there's something about, well, and I think you're the living proof of this too, right? When we write a book, what happens is we become even more learned in the content we're trying to render. What I find fascinating about you and what you've done is you've actually now rendered a course out of your book. So you've now taken some of those Z-isms and you've now made it into a pretty interesting course that you're offering to organizations. So um, when you I want to talk we're going to talk more about that content, but first, going back to what you said before in the first segment, you were talking about trying to be able to use data to be able to convince executives to invest in well-being kinds of courses and programs. um, I think you and I talked on the phone before we came on about the ROI of investing in well-being in the workplace, and I know a lot of people are doing this. Do you have any stats or data on that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, delivering on the state of affairs with the current impact of unwellness is, well, what do you do? And what do you gain from investing in well-being programs? And there's really good research out there in and around productivity, reduction on burnout. Every dollar you spend, is $6 gained in a
Mm,
cost to cost ratio. The data is out there, and I think again, inherently, as much as we can speak to statistics, I think just as human beings, we all understand we need this. People are hurting, and that includes executives, as we just discussed. And so, what I would like to impart is that while it's nice to have certain programs to introduce people to mindfulness, for example, or things, I do think that a lot of companies are just scratching the surface. And if they
mm,
want to really impact their people and for themselves, they really need to go deeper and have people make some lifestyle changes through the learnings of those programs.
I completely agree with that. So then let's kind of talk a little bit about what you've created. I've seen you've got a beautiful 2-page flyer that I think is just awesome that talks about your modules and some of the content. But let's talk here on the show so people get a better idea of what we mean. If we're
Sure.
talking about a life improvement or well-being program, what the heck is that? So talk a little bit about, like, if you would, the topics, the content that you're working with.
Right. Well, one of the things that led me to do it to the point here is that I realized after the book that a lot of the techniques and the insights in it do not entirely translate to be put into practice by just reading.
Right. Totally
And
understand.
and so it really is something that has to be experienced in order to be learned. And so the courses, although based on all the content and Z-isms, is very different. The book is a lot about personal anecdotes and things as examples to the concepts being described. The course is around activities and immersing people into experiencing what it's like to, do X, Y, Z. Now, to your question, um, there's a standalone course called the Mindset Reset that is also the first part of the other two courses. So with that, and a lot of people talk about mindset and have different understandings of what that is. And in a number of ways, it has its own lane for a lot of different people. And I do feel the content is very distinct. I begin and focus on perception just just to put things into context. I think people forget that just because they think something or they experience something doesn't entirely make it accurate or true.
Right.
And looking at things through that lens is really important to put into context, whether that's to give others or yourself the benefit of the doubt, whether that's to stop all the moving parts in your life and take the what's called a perception snapshot to assess really how things are going and where are my hot spots, and just step back from it all. Then we get into one of those concepts, which is actually the chapter 1 in the book, at least, called earned confidence.
Hmm.
And what it's very different from confidence itself. Earned confidence speaks to some of what I was talking about and why I wrote the book, which speaks to the fact that all of us have been through all the things we have in our lives. We've all overcome however much we have, and for everyone, that's a lot. And as we all know, and we're still here. I mean, we've proven to ourselves that we are fully capable of overcoming and coping with things in real time. And what's important about that is that it's entirely definitive, meaning that if that's the case, if you buy into I can just deal with the real because you already know you can because you've proven it to yourself through all the things you've been through, then you realize you don't have to get caught up in any uncertainties, specifically worry, for one, as well as anxiety or making assumptions, or in relationships, even jealousy. So anything that is not dealing with the real, earn confidence is a reminder that you can just stay grounded in the present and deal with things as they occur, and you'll be just fine, just as you always have. And even if you're going through the worst thing ever, you're still going to make it through because you have to. So I think that earned confidence is another one of those grounding principles to help people stay present. Any point about that? I don't want to keep going on a.
Yeah.
Just like one to the next, but any
I
thoughts?
know. I love that. No, I appreciate that. Thanks, Matt. Hey, so what came to mind, and listeners and viewers, if you remember, and if you caught this episode that we recorded several months ago with Dr. Nate Zinzer, interestingly enough, Dr. Nate Zinzer, he has a book out on confidence, and he's got a very interesting approach to it. And so it maps over it nicely and supports what you're saying as well, Matt. So listeners and viewers, I think confidence is one of those kind of things that a lot of people struggle with. So I would definitely pick up Matt's book, Zinman's book, and also Nate Zinzer's. Check out both of those because I know confidence is something that's really important. So I really like how you address that, Matt. Couldn't agree more that you have a different take on that. That's kind of fresh. So definitely glad you brought that up. I am curious as well. I mean, we'll talk about some of the other modules here in a second, but I am curious, how is your course delivered? How do people consume it?
Well, in order to experience it, it has to be self-paced. So it's online in bite-sized chunks for people to subscribe to and just go through piece by piece. In a corporate, of course, individuals can all, it's for human beings. So an individual can buy it outright and experience it for themselves. But in a corporate setting, for our topic here and for well-being, it's also important for us to provide like discussion guides so that people keep each other accountable. So there's a mini book club experience and team building experience that goes with that, so that a few times through the whichever course, whether they do just the mindset reset or they continue on to either of the other two, well-being reset and then the life upgrade, there are discussions that they can all just continue to meet with and make sure that they're staying on track and reinforcing the learning and experiences they can share together through the learning and experiences of the course.
Are you then also, Matt, it's because I've talked before, my content is also online as well. I'm wondering too, is if you also are helping to steward the consumption of that content through the leaders inside the organization.
Well, it's a case-by-case basis. If they lead by example, the answer is yes.
Right.
That certainly is the goal. I think in any case, ideally, and certainly with the topic that we have here, you really need model behavior. And
No
so
question.
if a company is certainly already genuinely devoted to their people's well-being, if they are that people-first culture, which is really where I think this belongs, or unfortunately a toxic culture that's in so much pain, they're finally willing to do something about it, that the CEO and top executives, the more they're involved, the better they are in the example that they set. And, like we continue to say, they're humans too, and they can benefit from the experience of the training.
Yeah, no question. No question. Well, speaking of that, you've crafted another really interesting term in the world. This one of your Zisms is this concept of happierness. So what's that? What are we dealing with there?
Interesting. Well, I should clarify Zisms for one, in the fact that the book is not. A lot of people, is that quips and quotes, right? Because the whole isms thing, but it's not. It's a full-fledged book. It's kind of like written as though we're having a conversation sitting next to one another in a coffee shop of sorts. Happierness actually came after the book. It's not in the book.
Cool.
It actually came as a result of through the podcast episodes I did, and then going into the courses. And it was almost like I'm a journalism degree, at least, so I'm always looking for that perfect word. So I was looking for optimism in the present tense, and there is nothing quite that speaks to optimism in the present tense. And that happierness specifically is about grounding in the present, but also developing a reflex of positivity to whatever situation you're in.
I like that.
I mean, look, we only have so much control in life, but we can control how not necessarily all the things that happen to us, but right, how we react to it. And so the happiness reflex is that life skill that really is about looking for and living in the silver linings as much as you can. I mean, look, we all have to go through all the, lots of real to begin with. You're not going to be able to, you got to go through what you have to go through. But there's certainly, in most cases, some kind of silver lining and ways that you can cope better by framing it through a different lens, in this case of happiness.
I love that. Developing a positive reflex to whatever happens to us. I think that's got to be eminently quotable right there, Matt. That's awesome. And speaking of another thing that you've also created, which I think is great, in your module 2 wellness, you have a managing energy component that I think is really, really interesting. And the way you talk about in your book is interesting. So tell us more about that one.
Oh, thank you, Elise.
You're welcome.
Module 2 is, it's covering mood health, to the conversation we're talking about, as well as being a life athlete, in around life skills. And then there's the whole section on energy management, which really has 3 components. You've got personal energy, interpersonal energy, and universal energy. So I'll just hit this very top line. In personal energy, and this is really more coming at it from as an entrepreneur, people who are now home, trying to balance work and life. It really is about looking through and being self-aware of your energy more than it is about how you manage time. Can you align your competency with the kind of work that you have? If you do your best work in the morning, right, you'll align in that personal energy with do the hardest work at that point. And if you're fried mid-afternoon, you are home, the laundry still has to get done, for example, step away from the desk and do the mindless stuff. So that's the example of personal energy, is really looking at managing how you spend your days through a prism of energy more than time management. Interpersonal is also about self-awareness and how it is that we affect one another and recognizing how others affect us. So certainly all of the, from the mindset reset through the course, the common thread, and with happiness as well, is about being present, because right, you can't do all the things that you need to without being that. So in the present is when you naturally need to be self-aware of, well, what's my mood? Or as I encounter someone, what's their mood? Because there is an energy transfer that we have to be clear about. And the best example, if you go to a restaurant, you're in a great mood, and the server gives you a lot of attitude, and suddenly you're ticked off, that's because you allowed their energy to transfer to you.
Yep, right.
And then universal energy is a little bit more in the realm of the law of attraction, and essentially, your vibration and your outlook on things, and staying positive. And more than anything, I think it summarizes as, what you expect tends to happen.
And so to that end, Matt, anybody that knows me knows that I love to do random acts of kindness to strangers, and because it gives me energy and it puts energy out into the world. So I love to tell a woman that she's beautiful in a crowd. Invariably, she's very taken aback by that. And I love to be able to come and help somebody out, or come by and say something funny or complimentary. And it is part of my way of trying to, just spread that. I guess that would be your secondary, your interpersonal sort of thing. But I also see it also on that other spiritual level, and at least in how I'm expressing it.
Oh, I love hearing that, Elise. I'm the same way. I mean, my wife kind of is like, yep, that's, what my husband does. But yeah, I mean, any interaction I have, no matter how routine, I am making a conscious effort to make somebody smile, or, that makes me, it's a pay it forward kind of thing. And I mean, it's so small, but
it is
so easy to do. How much of a better world would we live in if more people did it? Hopefully that will be the case as a result of your listeners here.
I hope we inspired just a couple. Yeah. Let's grab our last break. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with Matt Zinman, who is the author of Z-isms, Insights to Live By. We've been talking a bit about what's in his program and his approach, his book. After the break, we're going to talk about how this stuff is actually being used inside companies. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. If you're just joining the program today, my guest is Matt Zinman, who is the author of Z-isms, Insights to Live By, the creator of various life improvement courses, and the host of Insights to Live By. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. So for this bit here, Matt, what I wanted to get into is we've been talking a lot about the ideological importance of well-being, and then we talked about some of the things that you address in your courses and in your book. Now I want to actually get into the application of all of this, and then talk a little bit about how this stuff lives and works inside companies. So it'd be great to be able to hear from your perspective, how you've helped a company with well-being, if they've used your course. Tell us maybe a case example.
Yeah, one of the best ones is a SaaS company, software as a service. And the reason why I like referring to this is because somehow, different industries have different cultures. And I've found that the software industry just, maybe because they're venture backed and it just, whatever that is, a lot of those companies are people first. And that's naturally where it has to begin, and what we talked about before, and their leaders are involved and their CEO is doing it. This is not, they're venture companies. So they're just under 100, and about 2/3 of them are going through the courses. Some are just doing the mindset reset, and they may stop. We're not sure yet. Some may want to keep going. Others are going through the full well-being course, so you can step up one into the next. And what's interesting is we're also doing pre and post assessments. And I think you already have a sense from the conversation here. We're really very much about data, and we want to make sure that the company sees those KPIs, the key performance indicator, movements of being measured before and after the course, and how, again, to the questions you were asking, well-being is actually impacting it. Well-being improvement, mindset improvement, are impacting performance. It's very different for everybody, right? Some people are going to come in and we're measuring against, and we keep all the data private for natural reasons, but because we're talking about their self-esteem, their self-confidence, their relationship with themselves. That's a lot about that self-discovery. That's what the mindset reset front end is about. And then having them come through that with, a personalized sense of, well, where do I go from here, and kind of calibrate them in that way. And we're really just so proud of, all the results that we've got there. And, to the different areas in the mindset reset, we break it down specifically in, their mood health, whether they consider themselves, to have contended with depression or in any other way. But generally speaking, how's your mood, and have people monitoring that. But worry, regret, fear, people making assumptions. The big one, and I think people can relate to this, is negative self-talk.
Oh, yeah.
And
ruminations. Yes.
The ruminations. And that also, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that is really one of the keys with the outcome of going through the experience of the courses, because it teaches you to be present. And if you're caught up in your worries, or you're caught up in your assumptions, or invented uncertainties, scenarios that you're running your head through, you're not present. And
right.
Meanwhile, right, you're getting all these automatic negative thoughts, running you on autopilot, impacting you. So to get people to the point of that presence, and then at that point, being able to really start doing the work to take on, the battle within, if you will. And, we all know it's not possible. You can't stop that inner critic all the time, but you can really, talk back, and that makes a huge difference. So, we're still getting, people are still coming through it in this particular case, but we have some great data on everyone through the mindset reset, and now a few people through the well-being reset. I don't know yet whether they're going to keep going, but the life upgrade course, the original big course models, mirrors the book. So there's actually 2 more modules in that one if people really want to go another 2 or 3 weeks. About an hour a day is how it's paced, but again, people can do it at their own pace. And especially in a corporate environment, we let them decide what's right for them and work around and through all the priorities they have, especially a SaaS company, with all the scrums they're doing and things
Right.
they're caught up in. So that's where we're at with it. But I'm so glad you asked me, right? Because this is why you write the book. This is why you create the content.
Right. I know. Trust me when I tell you, I know. So Matt, have you ever heard of the phrase limbic resonance? Limbic resonance?
I can't pinpoint it to answer you, so I'm going to let you. I feel like I've kind of heard of it, but I couldn't tell you what it was.
You probably have heard of it, but maybe just not using that same term. So I learned this from Danny Gutnick, who I had on my radio show probably a couple years ago.
I know Danny, sure.
Isn't he awesome? Danny, it's a shout out to Danny Gutnick.
Right.
Amazing human being. He talks about it in his book. We talked about it on air. Essentially what it speaks to is, that when people inside organizations or any kind of a group or whatever that are somehow combined, their limbic brains start to vibrate in the same level because they're meaningfully connected. And so what I'm wondering, it'd be really interesting. Why don't you do this in your spare time, if you would, Matt? Go ahead and go out there and develop a limbic resonance measurement system, because I think it'd be really cool if you could measure the limbic resonance of the people in an organization before they started your course and then along the way and after. Because I gotta believe, as people are inside the SaaS company you're talking about, have been continuing on through the courses, together their connection has got to be increasing, and that's that beautiful limbic resonance that we want activated inside human beings. That's what shows a team united. That's what shows a team committed. And it'd be amazing if we could somehow witness what's happening in that SaaS company through the limbic resonance measurement.
Interesting. Well, we'll have to talk a bit more offline about that. You've more than piqued my interest. I follow through on things, Elise. So
I know. I just gave you another just a small
homework. I don't mind.
Yeah, this would be another segment to your business, but I just think it'd be so cool. So I'm glad you know Danny. I think he's an amazing human being. So along those lines, you've clearly found this SaaS company here is clearly, I would put that in that forward-reaching camp that I mentioned when I first introduced myself and who I work with. So I'm interested too in what you're seeing and how other better performing companies are attracting their talent and caring for them. What are you seeing those kinds of companies doing?
It's interesting. I was thinking about this question, and I can really speak to it more from data that I've come across than I can speak to the fact, like, I can't say I've personally gone into X number of companies to see how, all these every company is dysfunctional, just like every family is. So let's just say the lower dysfunctional companies, to fully answer that question. But I think it really does come back to what are these new best practices that are emerging, that acknowledging and not casting to the side or just checking boxes in and around well-being in particular. I mean, it's not going to take long to see, everyone knows. I mean, the burnout rates are, HR people, the burnout rate's like 98%, right? Salespeople, high 90s. There's no secret here what people need. But that people are hurting, and that people treat one another as human, that empathy, that creating a psychologically safe environment. Psychological safety is something that you're hearing a lot more about. And then it's just, it's okay to say that, I need space, or I need this, or need to do one thing or another. If you can be that company that models from the executives all the way through the organization that kind of a culture, which makes all that possible to do great work and have a great life without all the challenges that people are still trying to overcome, companies won't have to worry about great resignations or retentions. They're going to earn the loyalty through action, and then people are just going to be that much more better off across the board.
Mm-hmm. I'll chime into that as well with kind of my perspective in a couple of ways. One, certainly what I'm seeing in the literature that I'm reviewing as I look at this to try to continue to be a value and service to my clients and to continue to write in my book, is that people really do want better pay and benefits. They certainly want that work-life integration harmony, a more of a harmonious life that allows them access and connection to important people, rest, adequate rest, exercise, instead of, scrambling and running to get to the office. There's a way to actually spend a couple minutes with their kids or get them on, to school, or drop by the gym, for gosh sakes. So we know that. They also really want development. They want to grow, and they want to be able to be prepared for a vibrant future. The only way to do that is to keep learning and growing. So
Right.
companies that are providing that development, which is what you're offering, which is what I offer too in my courses, as well as my consulting, that's part of it. And then what we've been addressing is more of the softer stuff. I've always done that in my life. So of course I address the passion, inspiration, and purpose, and the meaning piece of things. Couple weeks ago, I had Roger Steinkruger on my radio show. He spent 50 years in healthcare, the last 25 years of which as a CEO. And he talks about the importance of helping employees to nurture their passion, even if it's not related to work. Why?
Right.
Because passionate employees turned on in life do better. They create better results. And I really applaud and support that. Of course, I have a module around passion, so of course I support that. So those are some of the things that I'm finding that employees are really craving, and that if companies can provide that, and then of course more of that flexible, autonomous work environment, instead of having literally your derriere nailed in the seat on Monday at 8 o'clock and thou shalt not leave until Friday at 5.
Right.
Please stop doing that, to your employees, and let them have that connection, their vibrant connection to the rest of their lives. If you do that, and then you start to give them the trust and the support to do that work, one, we change the whole workplace. Two, we kind of change the whole world. And three, we make people actually want to come to work again. And then four, maybe we actually reduce and start to diminish the whole well-being problem we have in the workplace. So that's kind of where I stand on the matter.
Yeah, I definitely want to reinforce, we're talking about well-being, as the focal topic, but also, your company grows when your people do, overarchingly. And the mentality that investing in training, well-being aside, just training across the board, upskilling, that it's somehow an expense versus an investment. That's what it
Right.
needs to shift. So the companies really have to have that. I mean, the data is so clear, right, across the board. It's just, you invest in people in their upskilling, and your return on that it's not small. So you would think that companies would make that adjustment, and it wouldn't take long for them to recognize the yield of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I hope that our conversation has further convinced them, Matt. That's what I hope. So I certainly appreciate you being on the show. This show, as you probably remember, is listened to by people across the world. And what we're really caring about is how to create a workplace where people actually want to come to work and give their best. We create those inspirational leaders that lead them to their greatness, and we do business that betters the world. What would you like to leave our listeners and viewers with today?
I think it comes from the back end of the mindset reset about winning the battle within, and the definitiveness of self-kindness. And by that I mean when people work at themselves and on themselves around self-esteem or self-confidence and self-love, it can be very nebulous, and it can be difficult to know how to get from here to there. But if you focus on self-kindness and buy into, why be anything less than kind to myself, which you would hope is a rhetorical and easy buy-in, then you're drawing a line in the sand to not let yourself be unkind. And that is going to help you work on all your past baggage, all the negative, daily thoughts that come through. And again, allow you to drop all that negativity aside and remain present. So on the other side of earned confidence and eliminating future uncertainties is self-kindness, to drop your baggage and just deal with the real.
Beautiful way to finish, Matt. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so glad that our paths have collided. You can run from me, but you can't hide. I know how to find you. Somehow we've got work to do in the future. So thanks for being on.
So thank you, Elise. Thanks to everybody.
So welcome. Listeners and viewers, if you want to learn more about Matt Zinman, his life improvement courses, or his book, start by visiting mattzinman.com. Let me spell that for you. MATTZINMAN, mattzinman.com. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can catch it via recorded podcast. We were on the air with Dr. Linda Gratton, one of the foremost global thought leaders on the future of work and named by Business Thinkers 50 as one of the top 15 business thinkers and described as a rock star teacher. We talked about her recently published fascinating book, Redesigning Work, How to Transform Your Organization and Make Hybrid Work for Everyone. Next week, we'll be on the air with Tiago Forte talking about his book, Building a Second Brain, a proven method to organize your digital life and unlock your creative potential. See you there. And remember that work is an integral part of our lives and business can be such a force for good. So let's work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.